Hello, buenos dias, buenas tardes. Hello to everyone on the stream. My name is David Adler, and I am the general coordinator of Progressive International. This is my colleague of the Secretariat, Matt Kirkegaard. We are streaming to you live from central Santiago, Chile, from the headquarters of the Apruebo campaign, as everything gets set up for the election results to begin pouring in. Just over this balcony, we can see trucks and satellites and lots of roving activists and members of this campaign who are getting ready for a long, actually a short. One of the things to put from the stream coming to you 2 hours before polls close in Chile, which has, unlike many of its neighboring countries, unlike even the United States of America, from which I come originally, a very quick count of the votes. Just to say that, when do we expect to have the full results?
Probably by 8 o'clock, we'll be able to say definitively whether or not the plebiscite has been approved or rejected.
So, to that point, we are here. Constitutional plebiscite is taking place right now. Many are calling it the most important election since the fall of Augusto Pinochet, the dictator who ruled Chile for 2 decades of military government. I think it's actually really helpful to start there in terms of making sense of what this plebiscite is and means. Many people will start talking about the plebiscite in the context of the current government of Gabriel Boric, but I think there's many other different ways you could begin to tell that story. One of those begins in 1973 with the coup led by Augusto Pinochet, General Pinochet, against the democratically elected government of Salvador Allende, of course, with the help of the Central Intelligence Agency and the backing of the U.S. government. Now, just after that coup, General Pinochet appointed a special commission, mostly men, all his allies, to draft a new constitution for Chile with the help of what became known as the Chicago Boys, this group of men educated at the University of Chicago under famous neoliberal monetarist Milton Friedman, who came to Chile to install a new constitutional order grounded in the principles and ideas of an extremist. And 50 years later, that constitution is still in place. Can you say a bit more about what that constitution, the Pinochetista constitution, was about? What kind of laws did it enshrine? What kind of principles did it try to keep at the heart of Chilean politics, with or without the dictator?
Which effectively means that the state has no responsibilities other than democratic rights. You have the right to vote, you have the right to property, but rights to healthcare, rights to education, rights to other social rights, to abortion, to environmental crises. These are rights that are completely absent in the former constitution, active constitution. In this new constitution, up for a vote today, there is really an entirely different model proposed. It's a social democratic state. This is the very first article of the new constitution, changing what's the Constitution, it's the framework of the Constitution itself. I think this is really the most important difference to outline and mention that whereas the Pinochet Constitution really enshrined neoliberalism, this Constitution seeks to enshrine social democracy and progressive values.
So Chile then lives through these 5 decades, or I think we could say these 4 decades of governance under Pinochet's constitution. In that period, including after Pinochet was brought down from power in that plebiscite now 4 decades ago, there have been reforms, amendments, we might say, to that constitution to try to update it, keep up to date Chile's more democratic spirit, to democratize governance. But the basic frameworks in place, framework so extreme that even the water in this country is constitutionally privatized. And so it's out of that constitutional order that we get, there's another way of telling the history of the Chilean plebiscite, the uprisings of the past decade of Chilean history, which have been marked by tremendous mobilization from the youngest generation against that constitution. So one way of telling this history is to start in 2011. In 2011, you have the massive mobilization of university students here in Chile. And that's where this new generation of leaders first emerged. People like Camila Vallejo, now Minister of the Government. People like Giorgio Jackson, now Minister of the Government. people like Gabriel Boric, now the president of the Republic of Chile. What did the 2011 uprising have to do with Pinochet's constitution? Well, it was because university students in Chile, like university students in the United States, were being crushed with debts in order to attend private universities that were the only sources of effective and decent tertiary education. While the rest of Chileans, poorer Chileans, were forced to go to very shabby, very low quality public universities. Chile ranks the lowest in terms of public investment in tertiary education and the highest in the world in terms of university segregation between the richest and the poor. Sorry, the highest in the OECD. So that's one way of telling the story. So you start in 2011 with this uprising, and that carries us all the way to what's called the estallido social of 2019. Can you explain what the uprising of 2019 is and how it has to do with this constitutional plebiscite and the constitutional order first enshrined by General Pinochet in the 70s?
Yeah, the estallido social of 2019 was, really, this means a social explosion in English, and that's exactly what it was. It was months and months, nearly 9 months of sustained protest in the streets, especially here in Santiago, especially in this neighborhood where we are today. They were fighting for, and are still fighting today, of course, in this very vote, for basic social rights, to an education, to healthcare that is not a privilege but a right, to a new constitution, not written by a military junta, not written by golpista generals, but instead written by the people themselves, democratically elected, and with gender parity in this particular constitution. And of course, I think critical to mention that feminism was really a driving force in estallido, and it remains a driving force, a protagonist force here in Chile, in the Constitution, in the vote today, and in the struggle at large. Of course, important to mention that gender parity is again enshrined in this new Constitution. Not only gender parity, but also the right to abortion, and the right to robust sexual education, real so these are just some of the elements, but this estallido in 2019 led to the calling of the plebiscite against the Constitution originally, the very first plebiscite. And in this plebiscite, it was decided roundly with 80% approval that the Pinochet Constitution could not stand, that a new constitution was needed, and so began a process of constitutional convention, and moving from a constitutional convention actually into proposing the written document that we have before us today. And the Progressive International has translated it into English. If you're interested in reading the document in full, please find it on our social media and in other places. But
Hi, everyone. We're having obviously some troubles with the stream, with the quality of the audio and the rest. Sorry, it's just what happened. Great. Okay, we're back. Thank you for your patience with this process. The basic point that we're trying to make is that there's many ways to tell the story. And that the right, the reactionary right, wants to tell this story in a very narrow way, in a very one-off way. They want to say that this plebiscite is basically a thumb. Is that this is an inevitable march of history out of an authoritarian system governed by elites here in the city of Santiago to one that delivers power, popular power, back to the people in the territories, in the regions, in their indigenous nations across the country. So that's the broader context of this plebiscite. who is actually organized on both sides? Who is the said we don't support the Constitution?
I think it's fair to say that this is, essentially a proxy for class struggle, if you wanted to define it that way, between the two sides of this plebiscite. On one side, you have working class people, trade unions, the popular movements in the streets. The popular movements in the streets, and movements of peasants, movements of folks fighting for the right to housing. And on the other side, you have landlords, you have people that own the media, you have status quo in this country that's governed for too long. This is, of course, also that were defeated the election of Gabriel Boric, not even a year ago. So, this is sort of the composition on both sides. To put it bluntly, it's progressive forces and reactionary forces. Forces that want to move forward into history, and other forces that want to move, or that want to keep Chile in its past, in a document written by a military junta. So that's where we find ourselves today.
Chasso campaign is over $100,000.
10,000, yeah.
About $120,000 a month on just social media expenditure. They want a piece of it for this little bit of oversight.
Yep.
Whereas the Umbrella campaign is just barely holding together the finances that they can gather from supporters, from the popular forces that are gathered behind it. And the tactics of the Rechazo campaign very closely mirror, as we were saying, the tactics that were deployed to try to keep Pinochet in power in the plebiscite that brought him down in 1988. So that's saying this new constitution is going to usher in a communist dictatorship. The ghosts of communist dictatorship haunt over this country. And it's just about deploying the fear, the same kind of red scare, fear-mongering that is so common across the Latin American, right, across the hemispheric, right, and increasingly around the world through these kind of neo-fascist networks against which the Progressive International was formed to fight. What would you say are the two kind of narratives that each is going on? What is Aprebo trying to tell people about what happens tomorrow? And what is Rechazo trying to tell people about what happens tomorrow? A lot of people who are watching this are going to be wondering, what does the day after for Chile look like? So I'm wondering if you can trace out the two scenarios of Rebel victory and a Rechazo victory for the Chile that comes next. We know there's never going to be a status quo. There's no going back. But if we're not going back, what are the two paths that are now kind of emerging out from this plebiscite?
Well, as for if the Rechazo wins, it's very clear that there is no agenda that the right wing is putting forward. In fact, in this plebiscite, they're not able to really attack the document itself. They've had to invent essentially lies and fake news about the new constitution. They say that it would change state level and being enshrined in the founding, in the Constitution itself. So the two agendas are one of more rights, more democracy, and more popular power, or an agenda of whatever the rights the new agenda is after the day after. I don't think it's clear at all what if they're putting anything forward. It's a rejection campaign. So all they can do now is to essentially lie about the content of this document and struggle in a different environment tomorrow.
What's striking about this plebiscite is it's so rare you get an election that isn't just choosing a partisan flavor between one party and another, or one candidate and another. It's really choosing where power in a society is going to be instantiated. So if Rechazo wins today, this is the goal of the Rechazo campaign. It's to keep power instantiated, not just in an elite, but in like the political media business nexus. They want to say enough with this street-based politics, enough with these uprisings that we've seen repeatedly in 11, in 19, 20, 21. Enough with listening to the people and the demands that they write on placards and walk down the Alameda one street away from where we are now. We want to go back to the old days where we keep this constitution. And, we can ignore those pesky claims to rights, those pesky claims to what is guaranteed and owed to the people by a founding document. Whereas the Apruebo campaign and the whole point of the Constitution is to keep power instantiated in much lower, much closer to the street, much closer to the people and to the Alameda, to the spirit of these uprisings. Because by guaranteeing those rights, it offers a new strength to the claims of, we don't have water in Santiago because of the crisis. Where is the government? Where is it stepping to do this? I think we were just talking about this recently here in Chile about politics. About politics being how this constitution being the way in which the powerless, the voiceless, are able to access certain claims. Right? They don't have the money to go out and purchase those things on the market, and this constitution is the currency of those political claims. It's a way to go out and say, this article number 234, this article number 67 is guaranteeing me this thing. And I don't care what that nexus of right-wing politicians smoking cigars with their golf buddies says about that. That is what's owed to me, is the new constitution. So maybe we can go into the constitution. You can tell me about 3 or 4 key provisions that you think for an international audience listening in English should be particularly inspiring. One of our goals campaign has been to really not just educate the world about what's happening here, but to inspire people about the kinds of renovations to Chilean democracy, the kind of innovations that have been installed in various of the articles of this constitution. Could you pick out a few of those articles, given the hand that you had in translating the whole thing in English?
Yeah, the first thing I would highlight is really, gender parity is the foundation of this document. Feminism, a motivating force of the document. So in virtually all public bodies, there will be 50% men and 50% women. With, for example, in electoral lists, that all of the electoral lists. This really changes the power structure as to who is operating in the Chilean state at a fundamental level and addresses questions of gender justice. Gender equity. Another provision, I would say, is deepening democracy at a fundamental level. It lowers the voting rate, the voting age to 16 years old. For 16 and 17-year-olds, voting will be voluntary, and for 18-year-olds and above, it will be mandatory. So really including citizens at a deep level from an earlier age, and with more opportunities like the opportunity for democratic referendum, that is recalling of laws, or initiative, proposing laws themselves in the Congress, and again, as David said, bringing the democracy out of the politicians' hands and into the people's hands. 2 more I would just highlight very quickly are, this is a constitution for the 21st century, which means environmental rights are enshrined in this constitution. Nature itself is imbued with rights. The principle of buen vivir, of living well, of good living, is a principle that applies throughout the document and is specifically referenced. And as is climate change, that it's the government's responsibility to tackle climate change. It's in industrial policy, in environmental restoration, conservation, etc. And Finally, again, playing into this theme of rights for the 21st century, digital rights are also a key part of this document. There is the right to data protection at all levels, metadata, your personal data. In a world where we're seeing this data being eaten up by corporate control more and more, this is vitally important, as is digital connectivity, right, also guaranteed in this Constitution through public services. So that includes the right to phone service, to internet service, and for that to be of quality. So there are many more important provisions, but these may be particularly interesting ones that have not gotten enough attention, I think, in the international press.
I think it's going to be many people who are tuning in, not just literally to the stream of ours, but tuning into Chilean politics for this day, which usually happens around election time. There's a spurt of interest, and people kind of plug in for the day. It's a slow day, it's a Sunday. People can track the vote as it comes in and either celebrate or mourn. But really, the work starts tomorrow. Even in the case of an where the new constitution is won. One of the things that we've been hearing across all our conversations with the feminist movement, with the movement for the defense of water and territory, as well as the political parties who are all here, is that this is not just a catalog of rights. This isn't just a shopping cart. This is a program for struggle, basically. And that we know that tomorrow, what happens is we go back to the streets to say, okay, we've won these things in terms of this constitutional document. Now, how are we going to pass them through legislation? So it's going to kick up into the air a lot of fascinating, challenging, transformative questions that then are again the terrain of struggle, as the Pinochet Constitution was the terrain of struggle between elite people, neighborhood organizations. The question is, how can the Chilean people mobilize to make real promises that are set out in that constitution? There's nothing guaranteed. I think that there's something that we can learn from our recent experiences in Colombia. In Colombia, the Congress eventually succeeded to pass a peace accord that set out very clearly a program for redressing the causes of inequality and violence in the countryside, of demobilizing the FARC guerrilla group and bringing them back to the table as legitimate people and recognized political actors. And then a new president came in and just said, you know what, fuck that. We're not going to implement that peace accord. We're basically going to ignore it and we've ripped it up. And so when it comes to a new constitution, it's similar. There's nothing guaranteed about the translation of that text into meaningful rights. It just becomes, as I was saying before, kind of a tool that people can use in democratic contestation, in the conversations between people and their local council leaders, their regional governors, and their national government. And there's always the risk that the government comes to power, some attempt at sabotaging that new constitutional order, right? So, the right is not going to rest in the case of an incredible volunteer. There will be an attempt to undermine at every step the implementation of these things, whether that's through the legislative power they have. Let's not forget that this government, the Boric government, may control La Moneda, the presidential palace, but that does not mean that they dominate the legislature and can control majorities in Congress easily. And so there are these questions about how each one of these provisions, and there are so many, one of the main criticisms of the Constitution was precisely that it was too long. It should be shorter, it should be a more succinct summary of rights, more succinct summary of the direction of the Republic. I'm curious, what do you think are going to be two or three of the main points that kick off in terms of the difference or the distance between, in the case of Uprisings, the new constitutional order and the status quo? What are going to be the first kind of points where people say, okay, look, we won this, so it's time for you, the government, to take action, time for you, Congress, to do legislation to make this right?
Yeah, I think it's crucial to note that this is whatever happens tomorrow is the close of a cycle and the beginning of a new cycle. So this is not the end. This is not the end. In fact, it's the very first. It will be tomorrow on the 5th of September, the very first step into a new struggle on the terrains of one constitution or the other. Two of the things that we'll, I think, immediately think of first are the questions. One being water, the deprivatization of water. But in real terms, there are people using that water, and now it will seek to be redistributed in a more just, more equitable, more democratic way. What does that mean? Chile is a country that relies so heavily on water, not only in its mining industry, but also in its agricultural sector, two of the giant economic sectors here. So, really thinking about this input for production and how it becomes more democratized will be an immediate question. And there is a national water agency in the new constitution that will manage this. There are systems that will manage this, but it will be a point of contention. Another is the right to housing. This was critical in the struggle for writing this new document. There was a provision in the Constitutional Convention itself that allowed citizens to propose articles. This was an article proposed by citizens themselves gathering signatures, not by the constituents writing the document. And what it guarantees the right to housing. It discourages real estate speculation, turning housing into a commodity instead of a human right. What's that? This is going to be an immediate question that there are mobilized movements ready to fight for and struggle for right now, and an urgent need for so many people struggling to make rent or to just live in decent housing every day. So
I'm seeing some people commenting that the quality of our audio is poor. I think it has to do with the quantity of sound pollution we have around us. We've chosen to come at you live from the headquarters here, which we thought would be a kind of cultural experience, but maybe it's also giving us severe technical problems. So, for those who are wondering, we will be doing extra kinds of broadcasting, small clips, short clips in English, in Espanol, to publish throughout the afternoon and the evening as the vote rolls in. So yeah, I think that really covers a summary of some of the history. So let's go back. The history is making sense of this plebiscite, not just in apruebo and rechazo, but to understand that this struggle way predates this month, these months, this year, this last election, this presidential cycle, to encompass a half century of struggle against the military order installed by Augusto Pinochet. And because it predates it by a half century, it's going to out it. It's going to succeed in that struggle long after this constitution is won. Not only because it's going to take time for people to access the rights that they're going to win today, because we're going to win this election, we hope, we want, but also because even in the case of the loss, the spirit of rebellion from the Pinochet era resistance all the way to the estallido that kicked off 3 years ago is going nowhere. And I think many of you will have seen images from the Sierra, from the close of the campaign on Thursday here in Santiago. 500,000 people turned out just for the closing of this campaign. A hugely inspiring, but also very fun, symbolically rich ceremony to close out a campaign that many are calling the most important in the history of modern Chile since the fall of the Pinochet dictatorship. And that energy is just not going to dissipate. People are not going to let anyone, left, right, center, take away the gains that were made in the course of that uprising to put the needs, priorities, and political demands of people out of sight. Again, Chilean politics. So I think, as we come to the end of the stream here, that's the key thing to emphasize, that there is no going back. The Pinochet order is dead and gone. The Chicago boys' ideas have been buried and hopefully will stay unzombified in the cemetery. The question is, what are the steps forward on the path to a new Republic of Chile, to that feminist, ecologist, plurinational Republic of Chile? And the question remains, how that Chile comes to be shaped. In the case of a victory today, that's a great leap forward. Terrible phrasing. That is a large step forward in drawing a trajectory towards a new Chile. but it becomes how to take 2 large steps forward in that process of democratic refoundation. So I want to pass it to you, Matt, to answer to people who are watching. I mean, what are the international implications of this campaign, and why have all of our supporters, why has everyone been so involved, and what's been the impact of the Progressive International's campaign to defend Chile's right to refoundation?
Yeah, this constitution was written by the Chilean people, and this document is not going anywhere. If we lose tomorrow, we win tomorrow, this document exists. Will it be enforced? Perhaps not, perhaps, but it nevertheless shows the way, and the Chilean people have shown the way towards a path to democratic refoundation and reimagining what is constitutionally possible in the 21st century. This applies to other countries that are currently debating whether or not to have a constitutional convention themselves: Guatemala, Honduras, Peru, all of many other countries as well. Countries where a constitutional reform isn't even on the table, but now are just imagining what could be possible, like in the United States or in parts of Europe. So the fact that this document exists and will exist forever is a step forward in and of itself. And we at the Progressive International have really tried to bring this forward into the international space, again, by translating it, by highlighting its key provisions, and also by mobilizing the support of the international community here in Chile to show that the world is with Chile. Chile is not alone in this process. This has global implications. This has implications for rights and democratic governance worldwide, and is a historic moment that comrades, leftists, progressives around the world need to be aware of and need to be standing in solidarity. So we've tried to do this for a number of ways. I think really the key one, especially for folks watching today, would be to just read the document. It's a magnificent document. It's a poetic document, and one that I think opens the possibilities for what is really possible in democratic reform.
So with that, above all, we wanted to thank everyone. I know that this has been troubled stream in terms of the quality of the connection, in terms of the sound quality, all of the above. We're still working on that. I'm not a very good technician. But above all, for accompanying us on this journey. I think one thing to communicate now emphatically is the gratitude and the extent of the excitement of our Chilean friends, allies, partners, and members of the PI for the solidarities that have been expressed across our groups of feminist ecologists, economists, and all of the above. And Chile does not feel alone. I think that in that we've really accomplished what we set out to accomplish in delivering on the mission of our PI, to organize, to mobilize, to educate progressive forces around the world towards the support, meaningful solidarity for progressive forces here in the given context, and here in Chile, to win a new constitutional order and to win a new Chile. So thank you very much. For those who are asking questions in the comments, you can write to me. My DMs are open. I'm happy to be in touch and correct for our technical failures today. We'll be broadcasting all evening. We'll hop back on, keep in touch with you. Thanks so much for tuning in, and let me know if we can answer any of your particular questions, whether that's on Twitter or